What do the civil rights movements of the 1960s, the George Floyd protests of 2020, and the modern No Kings rallies all have in common, besides the fact that at least one person showed up with a drum that they insisted everyone wanted to hear? They're all part of America's long, messy, and occasionally musical story of freedom of assembly. The right to gather, to protest, and associate with whomever you please, or refuse to associate with whomever you please. And today, we're delving deep into that right. Not just the March on Washington part, but the whole who can you hang out with and whether the government gets to know about that part. Because when the founders wrote the First Amendment, they gave us the right of the people peacefully to assemble. It sounds simple. Spoiler alert, it's not. Because if you've ever been forced into a group project, you already know. Freedom of assembly can be complicated. Hi, I'm Jenny, and welcome to Knowledge is Power, a video series where we are delving deep into the First Amendment and taking a look at what it protects and what it doesn't. I went to law school, so you don't have to. In this series, we're taking a close look at the First Amendment and what it protects and what it doesn't. I know a thing or two about the peaceful right to assemble. I've been protesting most of my adult life, from Take Back the Night rallies to protesting the Muslim ban in 2017, from marching in solidarity with Standing Rock to marching in response to the Me Too movement, to getting shot by the police during the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020. And the one thing I can tell you, without uncertainty, is that every protest starts out peacefully, until the police get involved. I have been maced, I have been tear gassed multiple times, and I've even been shot by the police. All for marching peacefully in solidarity with a movement. And you know what every last one of those protests had in common? The right of the people peacefully to assemble. Now, let's get into the disclaimers and the case law behind the freedom of assembly. The disclaimers. You cannot construe this as legal advice. It just isn't. It won't help you defend yourself in a court of law, but you're too smart for that anyway, right? It also won't help you pass your Con Law 1 exam. It's not what this is about. All right, so let's start with a classic. NAACP versus Alabama. This case came to us in 1958. Back in the Jim Crow South, Alabama demanded that the NAACP hand over its membership lists, names, addresses, the whole shebang, claiming it was for administrative reasons. The Supreme Court said, in essence, "Nice try, Alabama. We see what you're doing." Forcing disclosure like that, the court said, would chill people's willingness to join the NAACP. And when the government scares people out of associating, especially for political or civil rights causes, that violates the First Amendment. Fast forward 6 decades. Replace paper lists with spreadsheets and data breaches, and the question still stands. Can the government make you reveal who's in your group? Enter Americans for Prosperity Foundation versus Bonta in 2021. California said, "Hey, nonprofits, we just want to know who your big donors are, purely for oversight." And the Supreme Court said, "Sure, Jan." The Supreme Court struck the law down, saying that it violated the freedom of association. Why? Because requiring nonprofits to disclose their donor list to the state created a risk of chilling participation. People might stop donating if they fear harassment or exposure. Basically, the court said, you can't protect democracy by scaring people out of it. This ruling extended the NAACP versus Alabama logic into the modern nonprofit world. The principle is the same. Anonymity can protect participation. Now, there is still room for transparency. Campaign finance laws still require public disclosure of major political donors. Think Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976. But Americans for Prosperity shows a court increasingly skeptical of sweeping disclosure rules. So the next time you sign a petition or donate to a group, you can thank the NAACP and a libertarian think tank for keeping your name off of a government spreadsheet. Strange bedfellows, but that's constitutional law for you. So what about the opposite problem? Not keeping the government out of a group, but forcing them in. Cue the University of Wisconsin, circa 2000, and Board of Regents versus Southworth. Students were required to pay a fee that went to all kinds of campus clubs, political, religious, environmental, the Save the Squirrels kind of people. But some students said, hang on, you're making me fund a group that I fundamentally disagree with. That's compelled association. The court said, you're not funding their ideas, you're funding the marketplace of ideas. In other words, as long as the process for distributing those fees is viewpoint neutral, it is allowed. You can't force everyone to agree, but you can force them to chip in for the student version of the public square. But what happens when the compelled association leaves the campus and hits the workplace? That's where Janus versus Ask Me enters the chat. It's a case from 2018. Mark Janus, a state employee, did not want to pay agency fees to his union, arguing that that was compelled speech. He was being forced to subsidize political positions he opposed. The court agreed, overturning decades of precedent. Now, public employees cannot be required to pay union fees unless they affirmatively consent. The takeaway? The First Amendment protects not just what you say, but what you refuse to say, and sometimes what you fund and refuse to fund. So from campus clubs to labor unions, the court has said forced association is a constitutional red flag. Now we flip the script again. What if you don't want someone in your group and the government says, too bad, you have to include them? Let's rewind a bit. In Roberts versus United States Jaycees, a case from 1984, the Jaycees were a civic group who didn't allow women as full members. Minnesota said that's discrimination, and the court agreed. The Jaycees weren't small or intimate enough to count as a private expressive association. They were more like a big community club. Contrast that with Hurley versus Irish American Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Group of Boston, a case from 1995. Parade organizers did not want an LGBTQ group marching under its banner. The court sided with the parade organizers. Because the parade itself was expressive, forced inclusion would alter their message. And then came Boy Scouts of America versus Dale, a case from 2000. The Boy Scouts revoked membership of a gay scoutmaster, saying that it conflicted with their values. The court said, if including someone changes your message, the government cannot force it. That is the doctrine of expressive association. Now here's where modern America complicates things. Post-2005, lower courts have wrestled with how Dale interacts with evolving civil rights protections, especially around sexual orientation, gender identity, and religion. Think of cases like the Masterpiece Cake Shop controversy. While technically a compelled speech case, it's riding the same wave. When does anti-discrimination law meet expressive freedom? So whether it's a scout troop, a sorority, or a 2025 No Kings rally, the question remains, when can the government tell you who to include, and when does that cross over into dictating your beliefs? Let's bring it back to today. The marches, the rallies, the hashtags. When people took to the streets after George Floyd's murder in 2020, they exercised freedom of assembly in its most visible form. But behind every protest is an organization, sometimes formal, sometimes loose, that must protect its members' right to associate freely. Governments may watch from the sidelines, but if they start collecting names requiring disclosures or chilling participation, they bump straight into NAACP versus Alabama and Bonta. And the current No Kings rallies, they're the 21st century heirs to that tradition, gathering to express dissent, organize, advocate. The same principles protect their right to assemble peacefully and privately. So when we talk about freedom of assembly, we're really talking about freedom of association, the right to band together for a cause, to find each other, to speak collectively, or to refuse to be forced into someone else's message. In other words, the First Amendment isn't just about what you say, it's about who you say it with. So the next time you see a protest on TV, or you join one, remember, the right did not start with hashtags or megaphones. It started with a simple radical idea written in 1791, that the people have the right to gather, organize, and not be punished for it. From the civil rights marchers in the 1960s, to the George Floyd protests in 2020, to the No Kings rallies happening today, the right to assemble and associate is how democracy breathes, even if it's feeling more like an acute asthma attack these days. And as for the government, sometimes the best thing that it can do is listen to the people, and when they use their First Amendment right to assemble. I'm Jen. This has been Freedom of Assembly, No Justice, No Peace. If you learned something new, or at least got a laugh, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's a group that you would refuse to join no matter what? For me, well, I wouldn't be eligible to be a member of the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, KKK. There's a ton that I would never in a million years join. There's a bunch that I would. We're constantly trying to build community in 2025, just so we can kind of get through it together. That's actually my family motto. We get through together. Next time, we'll be turning back to easy rituals for beginner witches. We may revisit the First Amendment at some point down the road, but as the wheels turns, so do we now turn our attention to more timely matters. Remember, every accusation is a confession. Free Palestine, and remember, we still have not seen the full Epstein Files list yet.